All right, Senator Whitehouse.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I welcome the panel, and I appreciate when we have these infrastructure hearings where the bipartisanship of this panel is so apparent and of this committee is so apparent. Mr. Speer, the ATA has taken a position that it would support adding a price to gas and diesel to pay for additional highway, road, and related infrastructure. Is that correct?
That is correct, Senator.
Mr. Policinski, does your organization take the same position?
We do, in fact, support increasing the gas tax.
And one of the reasons for this I take from an article titled ATA President Pushes Federal Gas Tax Hike to Pay for Infrastructure Plan, in which Mr. Speer is quoted as saying, taxpayers are already paying dearly for the government's inaction on fixing our nation's highways. Could you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, I do. And your state's a good example, Senator. Rhode Island
We're actually one of the highest cost states in terms of car damage from bad road repair that there is out there.
That's correct.
Coastal and old and so forth.
Doesn't matter how big your state is. Everybody's feeling it, and it leads to the previous questions about states.
So you're referring to the hundreds of dollars that consumers have to spend in repairing their vehicles from bad roads that have been pretty well documented at this point.
That's correct. I testified oral and written that $1,500 on average per motorist is what they're spending on maintenance and congestion fees. States like Rhode Island probably wouldn't be having to tax Class 8 trucks to pay for their existing roads and bridges that we've already paid for through taxation. So now we're being double-dipped to help pay for those roads and bridges because the federal government's not adequately funding the programs that it's created. So that's a problem. In contrast, that $340 billion through the 20-cent increase that I testified about, that is on average $100 per motorist for a year, per year for all roads and bridges in the country.
So by adding a little bit to the cost of fuel, you could make an investment in the quality of roads that would save far more than the motorists would experience from paying that added price in savings to them in wear and tear and damage and delay in their vehicles.
Absolutely. That $100 extra from the 20-cent tax gives you all $340 billion in new revenue in the first 10 years for roads and bridges. You go out here to I-66, one way, one day on one road. They're now hitting you at $44 just to go a few miles. You've almost paid half of what you pay for a year through the taxation on the 20-cent we're talking about for all roads and bridges.
While we're talking about roads and bridges and highways, let me ask you guys, we have seen a lot of freight goes through Rhode Island and in and out of Rhode Island by rail, and it goes in and out by highway. 95 goes right along the coast through Rhode Island. In Sandy, we saw 95 closed because it was flooded, and we have seen flooding of the Amtrak rail system, and particularly in Connecticut, it's very, very high risk from sea level rise and from storm surge. Let me ask you guys, how alert do we need to be to the sea level rise and storm surge effects on coastal infrastructure? Chris or Mark, Speer or Policinski? Go ahead, Mr. Speer. Let me ask you first.
Well, I think it's certainly a concern. As infrastructure ages, you've got to maintain it, but you also have to add to it. I mean, the economy demands it. The demands that are on our industry and
if it faces
waterways.
new risks, we should prepare for the new risks. Correct?
Absolutely.
Mr.
Freight
Policinski?
increases, you got to add infrastructure. Short up.
Mr. Policinski?
There's no way you can look at the fact that you just stated and say we shouldn't be prepared. We have to be prepared.
So let me turn to Mr. Thomas and our ports representative. First of all, let me thank you for the Port of Baltimore's participation in the North Atlantic Ports Association and your support for the marine planning efforts that help keep our ports efficient. And I'd like to have their letter made a exhibit in this proceeding, if I may. Mr. Thomas, I'll tell you, what we've heard from Norfolk Naval Station is that sea level rise is imperiling the very existence of that base, and that even if you raise the piers as the sea levels rise, it's really hard to go back and raise all the infrastructure behind the piers, the schools, the houses, the roads, the markets. It's an ecosystem, an economic ecosystem, and the military is now predicting that Norfolk Naval Station may be out of business in just a few decades. What's the lesson from this for our ports, our commercial ports like yours?
Thank you for that question. So, and the recognition with NAPA, I was just able to attend the annual NAPA meeting, and it is on all ports' radar screens with how they're going to deal with sea level rise. And I can tell you, the Maryland Port Administration, we've begun development of a port resiliency program for climate change that incorporates a 2010 vulnerability assessment for all of our port infrastructures. So currently, all port infrastructures that we build, new builds now, we're at a +10, so we've raised it 2 feet above current elevations. Our newest automobile port at Fairfield Marine Terminal was built at +10, and taking into consideration what the studies are showing us with sea level rise. It's a real thing. Our newest project that we're working on now is at Dundalk Marine Terminal. We have rehabilitation of 3 berths there as well that we're going to raise to 10 feet. And to your point, you can raise the berth to 10 feet. What happens behind it? So those are the things that we're struggling with now. We have a couple strategies. We are constructing stormwater vaults.
I think out of courtesy to my colleagues, I should cut you off there. If you want to fill out your answer a little bit further, I'd more than welcome you to do it in writing, but we're now a minute over, and there are other colleagues waiting, so if you'll forgive me, I'll defer to my other colleagues. But I appreciate it, Mr. Thomas. Thank you.